really like watching movies with my friends. We'll watch just about anything too. Action, adventure, sci-fi, Dwayne Johnson movies, because those are totally their own genre, and horror. Something about watching a good film with close friends just makes the whole thing even better. Last year, due to COVID restrictions, my friends and I couldn't really hang out like normal. But we decided to get together on Halloween to watch some horror movies. So there we were, sitting with heavy jackets and gloves on, in my laneway, watching old horror movies as they were projected onto my garage door. We didn't care about or even really notice how cold it was, how late it was getting, or the dew that fell and left us all a bit damp. We were just eating junk food and having an absolute blast. With restrictions lifting and things slowly going back to normal, people are less inclined to do things like this anymore. Why bother if you can just all go back to sitting on the couch together, you know? But that was a great experience. One that I don't want to lose just because we can go back to what we were doing up until last year. I haven't made any plans for Halloween this year, but I'm hoping to do something similar. It was a one-of-a-kind experience that I'm not going to forget for a very long time. And I think my friends feel the same way, because we got to share that experience with each other. And them being there let me share with them my love for old movies.
Hello, film historians. I'm Derek and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 11.
You know, after last week's episode, it's a bit hard to come back to Earth.
Yeah, last week was great. The episode had a great release, and the impact of having guests on the podcast led us to gaining new listeners, new subscribers, and overall just seeing the numbers really go up everywhere.
Definitely so valuable. Definitely something we will do again at some point.
Oh yeah.
But now?
Yes?
Now we have to show all these new listeners that we are full value. We need to show that we've got a good product here, even when we don't have a bunch of A-plus guests helping us out.
We can do that. Let's do that.
Agreed. First, though, we have some housekeeping. For starters, we have kind of an announcement. This will be the last episode that we market under our current podcast tagline.
What do you mean?
Well, essentially, our tagline for promotion is, a guy and his 16-year-old daughter talk about the films and people of old Hollywood.
Right.
And while we record this, that's no problem. But by the time this episode hits and people listen to it, you are going to be 17.
I'm kind of excited about that, actually.
That is right. Sam the sidekick, my co-host and daughter, is turning 17. So look for that update wherever you see our podcast blurb. And why not take a moment to wish the girl a happy birthday? Leave a comment or contact us on the socials.
We should tell them how to do that.
Well, you can find us on the Facebook.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
Or the Instagram.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
Or you can send us a good old-fashioned email.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast @gmail.com.
All one word.
But while you're here, definitely hit like, subscribe, and share. It's the best way for you to let us know you're enjoying it, and for putting our podcast in front of a larger audience who might enjoy it too.
So if you are enjoying this, then definitely do that.
And if you prefer audio-only podcasts, we're available on a number of sites through our hosting on Anchor.
Anchor is one of the places you can find us.
And Spotify.
Google Podcasts.
Breaker.
Radio Public.
Stitcher.
And Pocket Casts. So wherever you want to find us, there we are.
So today's show. We said horror films for October, right?
We did. And today we are looking at 1935's Werewolf of London, which is nothing less than the first werewolf feature film.
Oh, that's awesome. Let's go.
Is there something else you wanted to say there?
Ooh.
There it is. Our director is Stuart Walker. He made his acting debut in 1909 when he started working alongside David Belasco, who was a theatrical producer and playwright. Walker continued to work with Belasco as a director and playwright until 1914, when he moved to continue his directorial work in Detroit and then Buffalo. The following year, Walker organized an independent theater company, the Portmanteau Theater, which was quite active through the 1920s. In 1930, he then went to Hollywood and became a screenwriter and dialogue director. Walker directed his first feature film, The Secret Call, in 1931, and made 12 features before he started working exclusively as a producer in 1936. Werewolf of London was actually his second last film, released the same year as Manhattan Moon. He died in 1941 at the age of 53.
The screenwriter is John Colton. He spent much of his childhood growing up in Japan, so he ended up being very good at writing plays about Americans in far-off lands. In 1922, Colton was part of adapting Somerset Maugham's novella Rain into a smash hit play. 4 years later, he wrote the original play that was produced on Broadway, The Shanghai Gesture. After these very early successes, Colton was quickly drawn to Hollywood. There he worked primarily with MGM Studios. He wrote many intertitles for silent films, and as the world transitioned into making talkies, he began writing more screenplays. He died in 1945 at the age of 58.
The son of a drama critic and brother of a Broadway star, who joined the acting company owned by his sister-in-law, it might be suggested that Henry Hull had a bit of a leg up in the entertainment industry, and he certainly used that to his advantage, turning in a vast body of work on stage and screen over a long career that spanned 6 decades. Hull appeared in a number of films during the silent era, but was far busier on stage until the 1930s, when his polished vocal delivery and slender appearance made him an in-demand supporting actor in Hollywood. Turning up in a great many westerns, Hull is not heavily associated with the horror genre, despite his appearance in Werewolf of London, and he did not become part of the group of Universal actors that appeared in several of the monster films. In a resume not overly littered with big hits, there are nevertheless some very high-quality films Hull appeared in, including Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart, as well as adaptations of The Fountainhead and The Great Gatsby in the late 40s. The 50s and 60s saw far more appearances on television than in film, but his last appearance was a feature film, The Chase, in 1966, which starred Marlon Brando and Robert Redford. Hull passed away in 1977.
Born in Sweden in 1879, Warner Oland credited what he called his vaguely Asian appearance on a supposed Mongolian ancestry, although this was certainly not supported by his family tree. Oland emigrated to the United States when he was 13 and was trained as a Shakespearean actor, finding roles both on stage and in early silent films. Oland's sinister appearance led him to being cast in villainous and stereotypical Asian roles, and with this niche, he made the transition to talkies seamlessly.
So, to be clear, Oland is an example of an actor who appeared in Yellowface.
Definitely not a career that has aged well, with respect to that. But cultural sensitivity was not a consideration in those days, and if there was an opportunity to cast a known white actor in an Asian role, that's exactly what would happen.
And Oland appeared in The Jazz Singer.
Right, in a major role.
With Al Jolson.
Right.
Who is known for appearing in blackface.
Right. Sort of all your racist eggs in one basket.
When you looked at The Jazz Singer in your film class, was any of that discussed?
That's a big negatory on that one.
Wow.
Oland made a huge name for himself in the 30s, playing stereotypical Asian villains, most notably Fu Manchu. But the really notable thing on his resume were a string of Charlie Chan films. He made 16 films playing the detective, and they were both popular and profitable enough that they were credited by film historian Jill Lepore as keeping Fox afloat.
Now, he died fairly young, right?
Yes. Oland suffered from alcoholism and emphysema and wound up contracting pneumonia while filming Charlie Chan at the ringside. He never recovered and died at 58. Now the interesting thing is, they had most of the film in the can at that point, so they reshot all of Oland's scenes with Peter Lorre and released the film as Mr. Moto's Gamble. Even his character in Werewolf in London, Dr. Yogami, is portrayed as exotic and of unknown origins. Like, Who was this guy and where was he from?
Well, Asia.
Vaguely.
It's hard to believe that there was a time where werewolves and wolfmen were not staples of horror films, but before 1935, that's the world we lived in. We had vampires, and zombies, and mummies, and golems, and robots, and aliens, and giant apes, and man-beasts, but we didn't have werewolves.
That's incredible to think about.
So, when Werewolf of London was first written, a lot of the accepted cinematic werewolf lore was being created for the first time. Most things that people could say are the rules of being a werewolf, according to a movie at least, can be traced back to this film. And of course, it bears mentioning that cinematic werewolves and medieval European werewolf lore, they're not the same thing. At all.
What sort of rules are we talking about?
All the typical stuff. Transformation as the result of the full moon, a werewolf bite causing the victim to become a werewolf, changing back to human form after dying, vulnerability to specific plants, an unquenchable desire to kill. No weakness to silver, though. That wouldn't come until the Wolfman.
And was this one a hit? Like, at the time?
You might say it was a bit ahead of its time, but also a victim of bad timing. The film wasn't a hit. It was too closely reminiscent of a bad version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that audiences still remembered from a few years earlier. But Universal was ready to really get behind this production. Jack Pierce was brought on to do the makeup, and the original plan for the cast was to have Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi playing Glendon and Yogami.
Oh, wow. What happened?
Well, they were both committed to other productions at the time, and they weren't available. So they went with Hull and Oland. They were both paid higher than Karloff and Lugosi were for their films, incidentally. Now, the Jack Pierce thing is interesting. As Universal's go-to makeup wizard, he wanted to go full wolf with Henry Hull. But Hull disagreed with that approach, and he went over Jack Pierce's head to the producers, who sided with him.
Was he being a prima donna? Wanted that face shown?
Well, yes and no. Rumors spread for years that Hull didn't want to have to act from under all that makeup, and he didn't want his face covered at all. But what came out years later is that Hull's objection to the makeup designs came from the script itself. It clearly stated that people were able to recognize him as Glendon in the wolf form.
That's right.
And so, any wolf makeup he wore had to leave him 100% recognizable. Now, Pierce hated this, and he would have to wait until 1941's The Wolfman to do the sort of makeup design he'd intended all along. That was a merciless amount of makeup and required full body casting, and was just a nightmare for the eventual star.
That's a whole other story.
Oh yeah.
For now, let's concentrate on the Wolfman before the Wolfman.
Okay. What's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
We have a 6.4 on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
The audience score is 45% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the tomato meter is 77%. It won no awards. And the movie is available to rent in the Microsoft Store.
That's where we got it. We open with some creepy music over title cards. And we got the really old Universal logo.
Excellent. And then we see a map of Tibet, and Sherpas running around at a mountain base camp.
They are the expedition team of Dr. Wilfred Glendon, the renowned botanist.
Yes, he was a big player in the botany field. Basically an influencer.
He has come in search of a rare flower, the Mariphasa lupina, and it is rumored to grow in a valley, but the Sherpas believe that the valley is cursed, and they won't enter. So Glendon and his assistant, they have to go it alone.
Into the valley no one goes to, because of the demons.
Intrepid white explorers didn't listen much to the locals in those days.
You don't say.
They've been searching for this flower for 6 months, so they aren't about to give up now. But as they move through the perilous terrain, they hear the baying of a wolf.
Self-hypnosis is the basis of all superstition, Glendon scoffs.
Weird supernatural things begin to happen. Their feet become oddly heavy, and they're blocked by an invisible barrier.
And, oh yeah, they're attacked by a werewolf, right when they find the flower.
Yeah, that happens as well. They had been stalked by this beast, and it made its move, biting Glendon on the arm before being scared off. And despite the grievous wound, Glendon makes every attempt to harvest the Mariphasa.
Must get Flower!
Glendon gets the flower back to his patented Universal Studios mad scientist lab and studies it.
And just ignores the nasty scars on the old arm. Why isn't his wife like, are we going to talk about those?
Incredibly, Glendon has a video surveillance system. He spies on his wife as she arrives at his lab. And then later he promises to be more human to her once he finishes his experiments.
That comment won't age well. But he is studying the creation of artificial moonlight. That's his project. He doesn't enjoy going to botanical society to-dos, and the whole party scene that seems to accompany being a renowned botanist.
His wife Lisa has an old friend, an old male friend, arrived from America. Maybe he'll pay more attention to her, and his name is Paul Ames.
Paul is also famous. He and Glendon don't get along much.
Yeah, they are a bit frosty to each other.
And Glendon, for some reason, has a sarlacc.
What the?
It eats frogs and mice for an audience.
That is just a super cool effect and prop. I did not see that coming at all.
I guess in the original script, there was a scene where that thing tries to eat a boy and Glendon saves him.
I feel like Glendon could use the softening a bit. He's been a total jerk since the moment this film began.
Just then, a weird, vaguely Asian guy comes up to the party. This is Dr. Yogami.
He says he met Glendon in Tibet. He also likes plants. They were both looking for the phosphorescent wolf flower, Araphesa lupina, that only blooms in moonlight.
Yogami wants to see Glendon's flower. That's a no-go. And there's a lot of flirty back and forth between Paul and Lisa.
In their conversation about the flower, Yogami lays the whole story on Glendon. He tells him of the cursed affliction of lycanthrophobia, in which a man becomes a wolf.
That word doesn't mean that.
There are 2 cases of werewolfery in London currently, he says, and he mentions that the disease is transmitted from the bite. Yogami then touches Glendon's arm.
Later on, Glendon's moon machine makes the Maraphesa bloom at last. But then his hand is covered in hair. He's transforming. Luckily, he pricks his hand with the Maraphesa, and the effect is reversed.
Well, that is interesting.
The next big part is scheduled to happen at the house of Lisa's old busybody aunt. Glendon doesn't want to go, so it is suggested that Lisa take Paul. Yogami is also invited.
On the first night of the full moon, Yogami visits Glendon. He wants 2 blossoms of the Maraphesa. It's not a cure, it's an antidote, he says. And he warns that the werewolf instinctively seeks to kill the thing it loves best.
Oh, that's good news for Lisa, since he doesn't seem to love her at all.
She'll be fine.
Glendon believes none of this until he finds that he has a book that details it all in his study.
Oh, of course.
He reads about how the Maraphesa is the only known preventative for lycanthrophobia. Without it, the werewolf must kill at least 1 human per night of the full moon.
But someone is stealing blossoms off the plant. 2, to be precise.
Yogami!
Lisa and Paul go to the party. Wilfred sits in the dark, alone, brooding, and all of a sudden his cat goes nuts on him. He feels weird, and his eyes hurt, and hair is all over his hands again.
The transformation scene is super clever. And while it is Glendon that goes to the lab, desperate to find some Maraphesa, it is a werewolf that arrives there to find the blossoms gone. He then has a vision of Lisa and Paul, and he barks and growls. But he also puts on a hat and scarf and overcoat, so...
Hey, best dressed werewolf of 1935. And meanwhile, Dr. Yogami arrives at the party and quips, "Don't you just love moonlight? It makes everything so peaceful."
That comment won't age well either.
Lisa's drunken aunt is taken upstairs at her own party for a lie-down, and Wolf crawls into her window and attacks.
Wait, he loves her best?
He flees when she screams, and the partygoers crash in, and Wolf takes to the streets, finds some girl, and he goes full Jack the Ripper on her. Yogami reads about it in the paper the next day.
The police are baffled. Well, it can't be a wolf. Not in London.
Paul suggests that it's a werewolf. He's seen this sort of thing before. I'm just... Okay. Of all the possible conclusions, werewolf is the first one he settles upon. I don't know.
Glendon is even more withdrawn than usual the next day. He's very jealous of Paul and a bit upset about the murder. He and Lisa make plans to go on a moonlight ride with Paul.
That sounds unwise.
It's fine since Glendon bails, and Lisa announces she will do what she wants, when she wants, and with who she wants. And in this case, she means Paul.
Glendon heads to a boarding house and he books a room for the week. He goes into the room and prays to God. Well, God doesn't listen, and he transforms again. He howls and smashes his way out of the room.
Meanwhile, the wolves at the local zoo are acting up. Some floozy is making out with a guard. Apparently he doesn't love his wife and kids. He loves her.
He is just living his truth.
Everyone in this movie sucks. No one is likable except the two old ladies who ran the boarding house.
Wolf spies on them during their tryst, and the first chance he gets, he attacks the floozy.
Not the guy, I notice. I guess punishing girls for being sexually active was a thing even back then.
Good observation. Now, the second murder really befuddles the police. Scotland Yard is like, what? And also, the two blossoms that Yogami stole are all used up. So he goes to see Scotland Yard, and he predicts 2 more murders and says, hey, there's a werewolf running around. He tells them to confiscate Glendon's flower, since that will fix everything.
The police chief doesn't buy this at all.
Glendon flees to Lisa's family manor castle to shack up and hide out. He shelters in a room with barred windows and asks to be locked in by the groundskeeper. But as luck has it, Lisa is bringing Paul to the manor for some sightseeing. At this point, they're basically dating. Paul confesses his love to Lisa, but she shoots him down.
A bit surprised at that, honestly.
Glendon transforms and sees them through the barred windows. He tears the bars out and attacks Lisa. Paul gets involved, clubs Glendon, and carries Lisa to safety.
Paul is like, oh yeah, the werewolf is Wilfred Glendon, and tells his uncle, the police chief.
But there has been a third murder. This time, a chambermaid at a hotel.
Oh.
In Dr. Yogami's room.
Oh.
Paul finds the dried up flowers and instantly connects the dots between the flower, Yogami, and Glendon, despite him not being a botanist.
Everything in this film happens very quickly.
Then we get the telephone scene. It has all of the secondary characters in the film talking to each other, trying to figure out where Glendon and Yogami are. It's clever and creative, and just stylistically very different from the rest of the film. It really works.
There's a lot of clever stuff in the film, but the characters, ugh.
Glendon and Yogami arrive at the lab just as the Mariphasa has bloomed. Yogami takes the flower and gives himself the antidote. The two men fight, but Glendon transforms and kills Yogami.
Oh man, we just missed out on a werewolf versus werewolf fight.
Right?
Why didn't they give us that?
Right? In one of the 2 novelizations of the film, the writers did.
It would have been so much better.
Paul and the police race to Glendon's house, but when they arrive, Wolf beats up Paul, smashes into the house, and attacks Lisa, who knows instantly that the wolf creature is her husband.
The police show up and shoot him, and Glendon says, thanks. Thanks for the bullet.
He apologizes to Lisa for not making her happier.
She's fine. She's Paul now.
And we end on a shot of clouds and an airplane flying across the sky. Wait, what?
That last shot.
Okay, I didn't hate this movie, but I have a few thoughts.
Time for pros and cons.
If you've never heard our show before, Sam and I don't actually rate films. We will just tell you a few things we liked and a few we didn't.
And then we will suggest if this is a film you should watch or not.
So here we go. First, my pros. Number 1, the mythology. The film takes its time to educate the audience on the ins and outs of what we would come to know as the accepted Wolfman mythologies. It's not a movie creature that audiences had much, if any, familiarity with in 1935, so taking the time to lay out the rules was a valuable part of the script. Number 2, the special effects. There were some great makeup and transformation effects, critical to recognize here since these people were blazing the trail that others would follow later. While the second transformation scene was a bit rough looking, the third was smooth, but the first one, involving Wilfred walking behind a series of set pieces and coming out the other side slightly more transformed, it was brilliant and seamless. Honestly, it's one of my favorite transformation scenes now. Not because it's perfect, it's not, but because it was such a clever way to use the techniques and technology available to create a compelling illusion. Number 3, the sets and props. From the gorgeous botanical gardens and the castle-like manor homes, the settings the actors got to play in were spacious and rich. But the props, this is where the imagination of the film really came to life. Glendon had that amazing video device. There was that moonray machine and even the sarlacc-like plant. These little touches put in so casually really made the film world interesting and involved. Cons. Number 1, everyone is almost too casual about the events in the film. Some people killed? It's just a werewolf. Oh, my wife is spending all her time with her old boyfriend? I'll just be in the lab. Oh, you saw a werewolf and it's Glendon. Pish posh. It must be a very amazing world inside that film, since such events are handled with such nonchalance. Number 2. I can't believe the writers gave us a fight scene between Glendon and Yogami and didn't have them both transform so we could see a wolf-on-wolf fight. It was right there. And 3, the lack of a brave ending. The ending is too pat. It's too cute. One bullet drops Glendon and he dies slowly, begging his wife's forgiveness while still in wolf form. That shouldn't have been. I feel like an ending where Paul was nursing a wound earned in his fight with Glendon would have been more open-ended. It could have left the audience with a sense of possibility. Clearly, a Werewolf of London franchise was not on Universal's list of plans at this point, but I'm just saying a sequel. Werewolf of America, following Paul after he returned home. That could have been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Is this a watch?
Oh, for sure. I don't think it's some great unappreciated classic, but it has some fun sci-fi, some neat horror, and it is an important film, just for its place as the first true werewolf feature film. And it's only 75 minutes long. Watch this one. Okay, you're up.
Okay, so my pros. 1. Wilfred's first transformation into a werewolf. He was walking past these pillars that would block the camera, and he transformed more with each pillar he passed. It was a really cool and smooth transition into the werewolf makeup. Definitely the best one in the movie, and it was really cool to watch. 2. The tech in Wilfred's lab. It all had some cool sci-fi vibes to it, and it was really funny to see all of the contraptions and remember that Wilfred is just a freaking botanist. It looked like he was some sort of mad scientist, but only when it came to plants. They were all just pretty cool to look at. 3. The 2 old ladies who rented the room to Wilfred. Oh my gosh, were they hilarious. They were just 2 crotchety old ladies who spent all their time snooping around, gossiping, and getting drunk. Plus, they straight up punched each other out a couple times. They were one of my favorite parts of the movie. My cons. 1. Most of the things that happened in Tibet, I feel like a lot of it just didn't need to happen. The part where Wilfred and his friend or assistant or whatever he was had trouble walking. Seriously, what was up with that? Everything that assistant did, he was just absolutely useless. And Wilfred just speaking gibberish to the Sherpas. That was just so messed up. Only the part where Wilfred found the flower and was bit were important. 2. The way Wilfred spoke. I understand that was a really popular aspect about the actor himself, but it bothered me so much. His voice was fine, but the way that his mouth moved and how he said his lines really made me internally cringe every time he spoke. 3. The ending. All of the action leading up to the ending was great, but the actual thing was a bit of a letdown. Everything was over so quickly, And it was all wrapped up so there would be no more werewolves or anything like that. It would have been so much better if Paul was bitten. Plus, what on earth was the shot of the plane at the very end?
Right.
It had nothing to do with anything and was super out of place.
So, is this a watch for you?
I'd say it's a watch.
Okay.
It's an easy film to pick on, but overall I liked it.
All right. Well, that really seems to wrap everything up in a neat little bow.
One of those good bows, the type that don't come undone. Like the one from that TED Talk.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one. You're tying your shoes wrong.
Well, not anymore, I'm not.
Fair enough. Well, people, thank you for listening. We will be back next week with another lesser-known monster classic. And while you are waiting for that, go check out our pals at Land of the Creeps and at Movie Lovers. These are both just excellent film podcasts with talented hosts. You could do far worse than to give them a listen. So treat yourself right, give them a sub, and check them out.
But in the meantime, if you liked this episode, be sure to drop a comment and let us know. And while you're at it, remember that you can tell anyone you want to about us and this show.
We are not a secret.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might be as concerned about the cinematic origins of lycanthropy as you are.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek. I love old movies. Sound effects used for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, come from freefx.co.uk. Images are found through the Creative Commons, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, comes from The Crux.